Short film, eerie mountain pass, cursed restaurant, supernatural horror tale, American horror style, terrifying trucker tale, urban legend horror, cinematic horror story, bone-chilling narration, true horror inspired, creepy foggy road, survival horror, woman cannibal killer, chilling folklore horror, dark female villain, horror fiction YouTube. The Serpent's Coil Pass. Even the name sent a shiver down Bao's spine, though he'd driven it a dozen times. Tonight, it felt different. Older. Hungrier. The fog was a living entity, thick and suffocating, pressing against the truck's cabin like a physical weight. Visibility? Maybe 20 feet if he was lucky. Headlights sliced into the soupy gray, illuminating swirling tendrils of mist and brief, unsettling glimpses of jagged rock faces slick with moisture. Beyond that narrow cone of light lay a nothing. An abyss of folklore and treacherous curves swallowed by the night. They said the pass collected ghosts like a spider collected flies, victims of landslides, engine failures, or simply vanishing into the dense white shroud that rarely lifted completely, even during the day. Tonight, it was a suffocating blanket. Bao scrubbed a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. 2 in the morning. Another 8 hours to Dalat. His co-driver, Min, had called in sick, a sudden, violent bout of flu, he'd claimed. Bao suspected Min just didn't fancy tackling the Serpent's Coil in this weather, alone. Couldn't blame him. The isolation up here was profound. Just the constant, deep-throated growl of the diesel engine, the rhythmic slap of the wipers fighting a losing battle against the drizzle, and the unnerving silence whenever he eased off the accelerator. A silence that felt watchful. Waiting. His eyelids felt like sandpaper glued together. He'd been pushing since noon yesterday, fueled by lukewarm coffee and stale crackers. The monotonous climb, the endless hairpin turns barely visible until he was already in them, the sheer drop-offs hidden by the fog just inches from his wheels, it was grinding him down. He needed a break. Needed warmth. Needed 5 minutes where he wasn't gripping the wheel like his life depended on it. Which, up here, it probably did. He thought about pulling over, just shutting his eyes for 15 minutes. But the stories echoed in his mind. Drivers who stopped on the coil sometimes didn't start again. Breakdowns turned permanent. Minor naps stretched into eternity. Superstition? Maybe. But the pass had a way of making you superstitious. It felt ancient, imbued with a palpable sense of unease. He took a long pull from his water bottle, the lukewarm liquid doing little to revive him. Just keep going, he told himself. Get over the summit. It gets easier on the descent. Usually. Then he saw it. A faint, fuzzy bloom of yellow light, high up on the roadside ahead. An anomaly in the oppressive darkness. It wavered, indistinct through the swirling fog, like a faulty beacon. Hope, sharp and unexpected, surged through his exhaustion. A roadside restaurant? This high up? This late? Seemed impossible. Yet, the light was undeniably there. Beckoning. Promising shelter. Maybe hot tea, a bowl of something steaming, a moment of human contact to break the crushing solitude. Anything was better than this relentless, nerve-shredding crawl through the gray void. He geared down, the engine's growl deepening, the sound echoing strangely off the unseen cliffsides that hemmed him in. Could it be a trap? Some lure for stranded truckers? The thought flickered, born of the pass's dark reputation, but his fatigue and the desperate need for respite pushed it down. It was just a light. A place to stop. What harm could there be? He signaled, a futile gesture in the empty night, and carefully maneuvered the heavy truck towards the source of the glow. The gravel shoulder crunched under the massive tires, the sound loud in the eerie quiet. He killed the engine, plunging the immediate surroundings into a deeper silence, broken only by the wind whistling mournfully around the cabin. He saw the sign now, barely legible, hand-painted on weathered wood, Serpent's Coil Noodle House. Open late. Relief washed over him, fragile but welcome against the chill that had seeped deep into his bones, a chill that felt older and colder than the mountain air. He pushed open the heavy door, eager for warmth, for sustenance, stepping out into the fog-laden night, entirely unaware that he was crossing a threshold into a nightmare far deeper than any whispered legend of the pass. He pushed open the heavy door, stepping across the threshold out of the biting chill and swirling fog into a wave of oppressive heat. The air inside the serpent's coil noodle house was thick, smelling intensely of cooked meat, soy sauce, garlic, and something else, something vaguely metallic, almost coppery, lingering beneath a cloying layer of cheap floral incense. It wasn't unpleasant, exactly. Just dense. Odd. A single bare bulb overhead cast long, dancing shadows, supplementing the flickering uncertainty of a few oil lanterns placed on rough-hewn wooden tables. The place was small, maybe 5 tables in total, surprisingly clean on the surface, though the corners held on to dust and the wooden floorboards looked dark and stained in places. A heavy, patterned curtain, faded and slightly greasy, concealed the entrance to what Bao assumed was the kitchen at the back. It felt less like a welcoming refuge and more like a meticulously set trap. And then she was there. Not walking from the kitchen, but simply appearing. As if she'd coalesced from the deepest shadows near the back wall. A traveler, lost in the mist? Her voice startled him. It was smooth, low, like warm honey laced with something unexpected, maybe spice, maybe venom. He turned, and his breath caught. She was beautiful, in a sharp, unsettling way. Pale skin that seemed almost luminous in the dim light, framed by a fall of impossibly black hair. Her figure, clad in a simple, dark AO dye that clung generously to her curves, was undeniable. But it was her eyes that held him, large, dark, and intelligent, yet carrying a predatory gleam, a calculating coolness that seemed entirely at odds with the practiced, welcoming smile instantly spreading across her full, red lips. You look frozen, poor thing. And driving so late on the coil, brave, or perhaps foolish? Bao shifted awkwardly, suddenly aware of his road grime, his exhaustion. Just needed a break. And maybe some food. He gestured vaguely at the empty tables. Are you still open? For a weary soul like you? Always. She glided closer, her movements fluid, almost unnervingly silent. Her scent, jasmine, and that faint coppery undertone, reached him again. Sit, sit. Let me take care of you. She indicated a small table near the back, away from the door. He found himself obeying, sinking onto the hard wooden stool, the exhaustion settling deeper into his bones now that he'd stopped moving. What warms a man on a night like this? Mai mused, leaning slightly against the table, giving him an unobstructed view down the front of her AO dye. It felt deliberate, yet casual. Calculated. Something hearty, I think. Braised pork? With a soft egg and rice? My specialty. His stomach rumbled its agreement. Yes. That sounds perfect. Perfect it shall be. She gave another dazzling smile, this one perhaps a fraction too wide, before turning and disappearing soundlessly behind the heavy kitchen curtain. Ah watched her go, a strange mix of unease and unwelcome attraction churning within him. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Just tired. Starving. Reading too much into things because of this damned pass. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Mai returned quicker than he expected, bearing a steaming bowl. It looked incredible. Deep brown, glistening chunks of pork nestled against fluffy white rice, a perfectly cooked egg with a trembling, jammy yolk sitting proudly on top, the rich aroma momentarily overriding his apprehension. Enjoy, she purred, placing it before him before retreating to lean against a nearby counter, arms folded, watching him. Always watching. He picked up the chopsticks, his hunger suddenly ravenous. The first piece of pork was tender, falling apart easily. But as he chewed, the wrongness hit him again, harder this time. The texture, it wasn't quite right. It was soft, yes, but also strangely resilient, almost chewy in a way pork never was. And the flavor, beneath the savory sauce and spices, had a faint, persistent gaminess, a pungent undertone that wasn't unpleasant, exactly, but deeply unfamiliar. Definitely not pork. What was it? Mountain goat, maybe? Some strange jungle creature? He risked a glance at Mai. She was still watching, her dark eyes unreadable, that slight, knowing smile playing on her lips. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully, trying another piece. Same thing. Delicious sauce, perfectly cooked rice and egg, but the meat itself felt alien in his mouth. He swallowed, his throat tight. Something wrong, driver? Mai's voice slid smoothly into the silence. Bao hesitated. No, it's good. Very good. Lair. Just the pork. It tastes different. Very rich. Mai laughed, a light, musical sound that didn't reach her eyes. Ah, the mountain pigs. They run wild, you see. Strong flavor. And, she leaned forward conspiratorially, tapping the side of her nose, I have my secret spices. A family recipe. Makes all the difference, don't you think? Her gaze held his, intense, almost challenging. He forced a smile. Must be it. It's memorable. He lowered his gaze back to the bowl, suddenly losing his appetite but knowing he had to finish. Had to act normal. He forced himself to take another bite, then another, trying to ignore the strange texture, the unsettling flavor, the way Mai's eyes tracked his every movement. He focused on the rice, the egg. Safe. Normal. But the meat remained, a foreign presence in the comforting dish. He finished quickly, pushing the bowl away, the rich food sitting heavy and cold in his stomach despite its heat. He paid the modest price, the worn bills feeling slick in his suddenly clammy hand. Mai took the money, her fingers brushing his, her touch cool and dry. Safe travels on the rest of the coil, she murmured, her voice dropping again to that intimate, honeyed tone. Come back any time. Bao just nodded, unable to meet her gaze, mumbled a quick thank you, and practically fled. He pushed the door open and stepped back into the thick, waiting fog, pulling the damp, cold air into his lungs like a drowning man surfacing. The warmth of the noodle house evaporated instantly, replaced by the oppressive chill of the mountain night. He fumbled for his keys, his heart pounding an erratic rhythm against his ribs, the peculiar flavor of the meal lingering like a poisonous residue on his tongue. He climbed into the familiar smell of diesel and stale coffee in his truck's cabin, slamming the door shut, needing the solid barrier against something. He didn't know what. He turned the key, the engine roaring to life, a welcome, grounding sound in the unnerving silence. He had to get off this pass. Now. The truck clawed its way further up the Serpent's Coil Pass, the engine's laboring groan a familiar sound that usually offered some comfort in the deep isolation of the mountains. Tonight, it offered none. Bao's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his gaze flicking constantly between the sliver of road illuminated by his headlights and the rearview mirror, half expecting to see, what? He wasn't sure. The unsettling meal churned in his stomach, a heavy, indigestible lump, and the memory of Mai's dark, watchful eyes felt like a physical presence in the cab beside him. That strange, gamey taste lingered, refusing to be washed away by the stale water he sipped. Mountain pig? He tried to convince himself again. Had to be. What else could it be? Was it tasty, driver? The whisper slithered into his ear, faint as escaping steam, cold as the grave. Bao jerked, his heart slamming against his ribs. He scanned the empty passenger seat, the cluttered space behind him. Nothing. Just shadows and the reflection of the dashboard lights on the damp windows. Wind, he muttered aloud, his voice sounding thin and reedy. Just the wind whistling through the seals. It had to be. Fatigue did strange things to a man's mind, especially up here, lost in the fog and the dead of night. He cranked up the radio, filling the cab with crackling static and fragments of tinny music, a barrier against the silence and the tricks his own tired brain was playing. He focused on the road, on the next treacherous curve appearing suddenly out of the gray wall ahead. Breathe. Just drive. Get over the summit. Did it fill your belly? Make you strong? This time it was clearer. Sharper. A sibilant whisper right beside his head, intimate and mocking. Pure, icy fear shot through Bao. He swerved slightly, catching the wheel just in time. Who's there? He yelled, the sound swallowed by the engine's noise. He risked glancing around the cabin again, eyes wide, searching the oppressive darkness. Empty. Absolutely empty. Paranoia tightened its grip, cold and suffocating. Was he losing his mind? Was the pass itself doing this? The legends, the ghosts. He shook his head violently, trying to dislodge the fear, the insidious voice. Suddenly, his phone shrieked, shattering the tense atmosphere. He jumped, fumbling for it on the dashboard. The caller ID showed his boss's name. A welcome intrusion of the mundane world. He took a shaky breath and answered. Yeah, boss? Bow. Where are you? Still on the coil? The gruff voice was blessedly normal. Yeah, just heading up. Fog's thick as soup. Damn pass. Listen, soon as you deliver in Delat, you gotta turn right around. Got an urgent run back to Hugh, need you first thing tomorrow evening. Big bonus in it for you. Tomorrow evening? Boss, that's barely time to sleep. I know. It's rush. Can you do it? Bao sighed, the exhaustion weighing him down again, momentarily pushing aside the ghostly whispers. Another night, another blurring highway. Yeah, boss. Yeah, okay. I'll manage. He hung up, tossing the phone back onto the dash. The brief conversation had grounded him slightly, but the unease remained, a cold knot in his gut. He blamed the pass, the fatigue, the weird meal. Anything but the chilling possibility the voice was real. Meanwhile, back at the Serpent's Coil noodle house, the yellow light continued to cut its weak swath through the fog. Inside, the cloying warmth persisted. Two truckers, burly men with weathered faces who seemed entirely comfortable in the unsettling atmosphere, were noisily slurping noodles at one table. Mai moved behind the counter, wiping it down with a damp cloth, her movements economical and precise. Her earlier encounter with Bao seemed forgotten, her expression placid, almost serene. The sputter of a smaller engine broke the night's quiet, and moments later, a different kind of customer pushed the door open. He was older than Bao, perhaps in his mid-50s, dressed in a surprisingly clean windbreaker and slacks, clearly not a regular trucker. He looked around nervously, taking in the dim light, the rough tables, the silent owner, his city dweller's caution warring with his obvious need for shelter from the pass. He'd clearly gotten caught out on his motorbike. Excuse me, he said, his voice hesitant, carrying a distinct southern accent. Are you still serving? Mai turned, her welcoming smile snapping into place instantly, though perhaps a fraction less dazzling than before. Of course, sir. Come in, escape the fog. What can I get for you? The man visibly relaxed a little, pulling off his helmet. Ah, wonderful. Some sweet and sour ribs? With rice, please. An excellent choice, Mai murmured, already turning towards the beaded curtain that hid the kitchen. The two truckers glanced at the newcomer, then went back to their bowls, uninterested. The ribs arrived quickly, sizzling on the plate, glazed in a thick, dark sauce, smelling pungent and sweet. The man's eyes lit up. He picked up his chopsticks eagerly and lifted a piece to his mouth. He chewed once, twice, then his jaw froze. His eyes whitened slightly. He worked something around in his mouth, a look of confusion turning rapidly to dawning horror. With a choked gasp, he spat something small, hard, and hideously white into his trembling palm. It was a tooth. A human molar, yellowish, with a dark spot of decay near the root. The man stared at it, his face draining of color. Nausea contorted his features. He lurched to his feet, knocking his stool over with a clatter. Tooth. He stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the offending object in his hand, then at the plate. There's a human tooth. In the food. All eyes snapped towards him. The two truckers stopped eating, their expressions shifting from disinterest to suspicion. Mai, halfway back to the counter, paused, her body going utterly still for a heartbeat. A flicker of something, annoyance? Fear? Crossed her face before being instantly smoothed away, replaced by wide-eyed, innocent confusion. One of the truckers, a big man with a dragon tattoo coiling up his arm, slammed his fist on the table, making the lanterns jump. Hey! What the hell are you yelling about, old man? The man trembled, holding up the tooth like grotesque evidence. Look! Human. It was in the ribs. Bullshit. The other trucker growled, pushing his chair back. You trying to pull a fast one? Get a free meal? No. I swear. It was in there. The man insisted, his voice cracking with panic and revulsion. He looked desperately towards me for help, for validation. I met his gaze, her dark eyes now chips of ice. She offered no assistance, only a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a look that sealed his fate. He was alone. You heard him, the first trucker said, standing up, looming over the terrified man. Making trouble. Trying to cheat the lovely Mai. He cracked his knuckles slowly. Maybe you need to be taught some manners. Or maybe you just need to get lost. Now. The threat hung heavy in the air, thick and dangerous as the fog outside. The man broke out in a cold sweat, glancing from the menacing truckers to Mai's impassive face. There was no help here. Only danger. Swallowing hard against the bile rising in his throat, he fumbled for his wallet, threw a few crumpled bills onto the table, far more than the meal was worth, and scrambled for the door. He didn't look back as he burst out into the night, the sound of his motorbike engine frantically revving and then fading rapidly, carrying him and his horrifying discovery away from the Serpent's Coil noodle house. Inside, an almost unnerving calm descended. Mai let out a slow, deliberate breath, the tension leaving her shoulders. She walked over to the trucker's table, her predatory smile returning, warmer now, directed at her protectors. My heroes, she purred, leaning down, placing a hand lightly on the tattooed man's shoulder. Her voice was low, intimate. Such fierce loyalty, perhaps it deserves a special kind of reward later tonight? The raucous laughter of the departing truckers echoed briefly before being swallowed whole by the fog-choked silence of the Serpent's Coil pass. Mai stood framed in the doorway of the noodle house, watching the red taillights dissolve into the gray miasma. The warm, accommodating smile she'd worn for her heroes lingered for a moment, then slowly, deliberately, melted away. It left behind something hard, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth. Her eyes, narrowed slightly, scanned the impenetrable fog. He'd be back. The one with the dragon tattoo, Vin. He wore his less like cheap cologne, and her promise, vague but potent, had hooked him securely. Men like Vin were predictable. Pathetically so. Turning back inside, she bolted the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing with finality in the small space. The remnants of the trucker's meal, bowls stained with noodle soup, sat on the table. Methodically, she began to clear them, moving with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice. The air still hung thick with incense and the lingering smell of food, but now, with the door shut and the charade over, the underlying coppery tang seemed stronger, sharper. She worked without hurry, rinsing bowls, wiping down the already clean counter, her mind occupied elsewhere. Planning. Preparing. She disappeared behind the beaded kitchen curtain for a time. When she emerged, she had changed. The practical AO dye was gone, replaced by a thin, almost translucent black nightgown that clung to her curves, hinting at more than it concealed. She checked her reflection in a small, flyspeck mirror hanging by the door, adjusting a strap, tilting her head, practicing that same intoxicating smile, but this time imbuing it with an edge of pure, dark promise. The stage was set. Now, she only had to wait for the final actor. Hours crawled by. The only sounds were the mournful sighing of the wind outside and the rhythmic drip of condensation somewhere inside the walls. Mai sat patiently in the dim light, motionless as a spider in its web, her dark eyes fixed on the door. Just after 3 a.m., the knock finally came. Soft at first, hesitant, then bolder, more insistent. Sister Mai? Vin's voice, muffled by the door, was thick with eagerness and cheap whiskey. You awake? You said to come back? Mai allowed a slow smile to touch her lips. Predictable. She rose, gliding silently to the door. She didn't open it fully, just unlatched it and pulled it inward a few inches, revealing herself framed in the narrow opening, backlit by the dim interior light, the sheer nightgown doing little to hide her form. I waited, she breathed, her voice a low, husky promise. Vin practically fell inside as she stepped back, his eyes wide, immediately dropping to devour the sight of her. He smelled of sweat, stale alcohol, and overwhelming anticipation. God, he slurred, reaching for her, his thick fingers fumbling at her waist. You look amazing. She sidestepped his clumsy embrace with practiced ease, placing a cool hand gently on his chest. Patience, strong man, she purred, her voice dripping seductive charm. Such eagerness. But first, you must be thirsty after your long drive back? Let me get you something cool. A special lemonade, just for you. Vin grinned foolishly, utterly captivated. Anything you say, beautiful Mai. Anything. She slipped away towards the counter, her hips swaying hypnotically. He watched her, mesmerized, his mind already racing ahead, oblivious to the cold, calculating precision in her movements. She took a clean glass, squeezed fresh lemon into it, added sugar, water, and then, shielding the action with her body, retrieved a small, unmarked packet from a hidden shelf. A fine white powder dissolved instantly into the lemonade as she stirred it casually with a long spoon. She turned back, holding the glass out to him, her smile radiant, yet somehow deadly. Drink up, she urged softly. It will relax you. It's a long night. He took the glass without hesitation, his eyes still fixed on her body. He trusted her completely. Why wouldn't he? He downed the lemonade in 3 long gulps, sighing contentedly at the sweet, tart coolness. Delicious, he murmured, licking his lips, already feeling a pleasant warmth spreading through his limbs. Just like you. He reached for her again. This time, she didn't pull away immediately. She let him draw her closer, leaning into him slightly, her eyes half-lidded. The bedroom? She whispered, gesturing vaguely towards a door behind the counter he hadn't noticed before. Vin needed no further encouragement. He practically lunged for the door, throwing it open, stumbling into the small, dark room beyond, already shedding his jacket, his mind consumed by crude fantasies. He didn't notice Mai hadn't followed him immediately. He didn't see her standing in the doorway, watching him with detached amusement as he fumbled with his belt buckle. Then, the world tilted. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over him. His limbs felt impossibly heavy, unresponsive. He tried to turn, to call out Mai's name, but his tongue felt thick, useless. The edges of his vision blurred, darkening rapidly. Mai's smiling face in the doorway seemed to warp, her features sharpening into something cruel and unfamiliar. He blinked, trying to clear his head, but his eyelids weighed a ton. He managed a confused grunt before his knees buckled, pitching him forward onto the rough bed inside, consciousness dissolving like smoke. The last thing he vaguely registered was Mai's low chuckle echoing in the sudden, immense darkness. Mai watched him collapse, her smile finally fading completely, replaced by an expression of cold, clinical assessment. She waited a full minute, listening to his breathing deepen into the steady rhythm of drugged sleep. Then, the seductress vanished entirely, replaced by the butcher. She stepped into the room, retrieved sturdy ropes from beneath the bed, and quickly, expertly, bound Vin's wrists and ankles. He didn't stir. Dragging his dead weight out of the bedroom and towards the kitchen curtain was strenuous, but Mai's slender frame housed a surprising, wiry strength. She grunted with the effort, her bare feet silent on the stained floorboards. Behind the curtain, the small kitchen space waited. It was meticulously clean, but the air held a permanent, faint metallic taint. Tools lay arranged neatly on a side counter, knives of various sizes, a heavy cleaver, a bone saw. All gleaming dully. With another grunt, she heaved Vin's inert body onto the massive, scarred wooden butcher's block that dominated the center of the room. It was stained almost black in places from countless previous uses. She took a moment, catching her breath, looking down at the unconscious man. No pity flickered in her eyes. No remorse. Only a detached appraisal, like a farmer examining livestock. A bit fat, she murmured thoughtfully, prodding his side with her finger. But the muscles are good. Strong. She selected a long, thin-bladed knife first. Tested its edge with her thumb. Satisfied, she made the first precise cut. Blood welled instantly, shockingly red against Vin's pale, drugged skin, spilling onto the dark wood. Mai worked with a chilling, practiced efficiency, her movements swift and sure. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. She hummed softly, a tuneless, discordant little melody, as she began the gruesome task of disassembly. The wet sounds of slicing, the grating rasp of the saw against bone, the soft thud of severed parts hitting the floor, these were the only sounds besides her humming and the gentle bubbling of a large pot already simmering on a back burner. The coppery smell of fresh blood quickly overwhelmed the lingering scent of incense from the front room. She worked methodically, separating muscle from bone, setting aside choice cuts onto clean trays, discarding unwanted parts into a bucket with careless thuds. She handled the viscera with the same detached focus, occasionally pausing to examine a piece of tissue, perhaps murmuring an assessment of its quality. The heart, a little tough, maybe, she might whisper, before tossing it aside. But the liver, perfect. Hours passed. Finally, it was done. The butcher's block was clear, save for dark, wet stains. Various cuts of meat lay neatly arranged on trays, ready for storage or immediate use. Mai surveyed her work, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. A job well done. She picked up the severed head, holding it by the hair, examining the slack features dispassionately. "You were noisy," she told the head conversationally, before dropping it with a dull splash into the large, simmering pot on the stove. Steam billowed, carrying a new, foul richness into the air. The main course for tomorrow's specials. Then, the cleanup began. With the same methodical efficiency, she scrubbed the block, wiped down the tools, mopped the floor, washing away the gore until the kitchen looked almost normal again, save for the neatly wrapped parcels of meat now stored away and the ominously bubbling pot. The transition back to the serene hostess was almost complete. The Serpent's Coil Noodle House would be ready to welcome new customers by evening, its dark secrets simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the next hungry traveler to cross its threshold. The pot simmered on the stove back at the noodle house, its contents gently releasing tendrils of steam laced with an unidentifiable richness, mingling with the ever-present cheap incense. Days bled into a week, each one marked by Mai's quiet efficiency, the chillingly normal routine of preparing ingredients, welcoming the occasional trucker foolhardy enough to brave the pass after dark, and smiling her unnerving, predatory smile. The neatly wrapped parcels in her cold storage dwindled. It was almost time for a fresh acquisition. Miles away, Bao was driving north, the familiar rumble of his truck a low thrum beneath his feet. He'd finished the Hue run, collected another load, and now found himself, inevitably, climbing the Serpent's Coil Pass once more. This time, sunlight, albeit weak and filtered through high clouds, illuminated the treacherous landscape. He could see the sheer drops now, the skeletons of past landslides, the precarious twists of the road. It wasn't less menacing in the daylight, merely starker. Exposed. He told himself he wouldn't stop. Absolutely not. The memory of that meal, the strange texture of the pork, the coldness in Mai's eyes, it still unsettled him, creeping into his thoughts at odd moments. He'd tried to dismiss it. Fatigue, the weirdness of the pass, maybe she really did use some strange mountain game. Who knew? It was easier to believe that than the alternative that sometimes whispered at the edges of his tired mind. Yet, as the truck labored around the familiar bends, nearing the summit where the noodle house perched like a vulture on the cliffside, a perverse curiosity began to gnaw at him. A pull. He found himself checking his fuel gauge, noting the rumble in his stomach. Hunger. A convenient excuse. Was she even open during the day? He remembered passing by once before in the light, and it had looked shuttered. But maybe that was a fluke? Maybe he just needed to know. To see the place in the daylight, see her in the daylight, and banish the unsettling memory once and for all. Prove to himself it was just his imagination, overworked and starved for sleep. Pathetic, really. This internal debate. He was a grown man, a seasoned trucker. Afraid of a roadside eatery? Still. Just pho, he muttered aloud, the decision made almost before he consciously acknowledged it. Simple broth, noodles. Safe. He signaled, though there was no one else on the road, and pulled the heavy truck onto the same gravel patch he'd occupied that night a week ago. The place looked quiet. Deceptively normal under the gray sky. No smoke curled from the chimney, no other vehicles were parked outside. Maybe it was closed. Relief warred with a strange flicker of disappointment. He climbed down from the cab, stretching his stiff limbs. Hesitantly, he approached the wooden door. He pushed it open a crack. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding thin in the mountain air. "My?" Silence answered him. The interior was dim, smelling faintly of stale incense and old cooking grease. He pushed the door open further and stepped inside, his boots echoing slightly on the wooden floor. Empty tables stood like silent sentinels. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light filtering through the grimy windows. Then, a faint noise from the back. A rhythmic thump scrape, coming from behind the kitchen curtain. "My?" he called again, louder this time. The noise stopped. A moment later, the curtain was pushed aside, and she emerged. "My?" She looked different in the daylight, perhaps a little older, the lines around her eyes more pronounced, but no less striking. She wore a simple shirt and pants now, covered by a heavy apron stained with dark, wet patches. Far too red for chicken blood. And in her right hand, held loosely but naturally, was a large, heavy-looking butcher knife, its blade darkened with the same substance staining her apron. She registered his presence, and her eyes widened fractionally in surprise, quickly followed by that practiced, slightly unnerving smile. "Ah. Bow. Back again so soon?" Her voice held its honeyed tone, but perhaps with a slight edge of wariness. "Forgive the mess," she said, gesturing vaguely with the knife hand, making him flinch inwardly. "Just doing some prep work. Butchering a large goat delivered this morning. Tough work." Bao forced a smile, trying to ignore the knife, the stains, the sudden cold knot tightening in his stomach again. "Busy then. I was just hoping for a bowl of pho. If you're serving?" Her eyes assessed him for a long moment, that calculating glint flickering within their dark depths. Then she nodded, the smile becoming more fixed. "Pho? Of course. Always time for pho. Sit down, sit down. It won't take long." She turned and disappeared back behind the curtain, the heavy fabric swaying shut behind her. Bao sank onto the same stool as before, his earlier hunger completely gone, replaced by a growing dread. Why had he stopped? This felt wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. He could hear muffled chopping sounds coming from the kitchen now. Faster. More insistent. He shifted uncomfortably, every nerve ending suddenly on high alert. Minutes later, Mai emerged again, this time without the knife, wiping her hands on her apron before placing a steaming bowl of pho before him. It smelled fragrant, the aroma of star anise, cinnamon, and savory broth filling the air. Thin slices of beef floated amongst the rice noodles and fresh herbs. It looked perfect. Bao picked up his chopsticks, his hand surprisingly steady. He had to act normal. He took a sip of the broth. Delicious. He picked up some noodles. Fine. He hesitated, then selected a slice of the meat. He put it in his mouth. The texture, soft, yes, but with that same faint, underlying chewiness, that subtle resistance he remembered from the pork. Not beef. Definitely not beef. His stomach churned. He managed a few more bites, forcing them down, keenly aware of Mai watching him from the counter, polishing glasses with slow, deliberate movements. Suddenly, he needed to escape her gaze, needed a moment. "Excuse me," he said, pushing the half-eaten bowl away. "The restroom?" Mai nodded towards the back, her expression unreadable. Past the curtain. Door on the left. Towards the kitchen. Of course. Dread coiled tighter in his gut, but he stood up, needing the excuse to move, to think. He walked towards the back, his footsteps feeling loud on the floorboards. The closer he got to the heavy curtain, the stronger that smell became, the faint coppery tang he'd noticed before, now amplified, mixed with a fetid undercurrent of decay, of something sickly sweet and profoundly unclean. It clung to the back of his throat, making him want to gag. Why would the restroom be back here? He reached the curtain, the fabric feeling greasy beneath his fingertips. He hesitated for only a second, then pushed it aside. The smell hit him like a physical blow, thick, metallic, and utterly foul. The light from the main room barely penetrated the cramped, windowless kitchen space. His eyes struggled to adjust, drawn first to the massive, dark-stained butcher's block dominating the center. It wasn't clean. Dark, viscous fluid pooled on its surface, dripping slowly onto the stone floor below. His gaze skittered away, landing on a large bucket in the corner, filled with scraps. Things he wouldn't identify. Bones. Grizzle. Lumps of pale, fatty tissue. Then his eyes snapped back to the table. Legs. 2 human legs, severed crudely above the knee, lay sprawled across the blood-soaked wood. Pale skin, dark hairs, muscles starkly visible where the cuts had been made. They looked obscenely out of place, like props in some B-grade horror film, except the smell, the dripping blood, the buzzing flies circling lazily above them were sickeningly real. Bao's breath hitched. His stomach heaved violently. He slapped a hand over his mouth, Bao rising, burning his throat. He stumbled backwards, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning, horrific certainty. His terrified gaze swept the horrific tableau again and found something even worse. Propped against the wall, almost casually, next to the bucket of offal, was a human head. Eyes wide, staring sightlessly at the ceiling, mouth stretched open in a silent, eternal scream of agony. Dark hair matted with gore clung to the skull. Terror, absolute and paralyzing, washed over Bao. His legs turned to water. The room spun. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the overwhelming horror. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the stench, the flies, the sight of it. He staggered back again, desperate to escape the abattoir, needing to get out, needing air, needing to run, and his heel caught the edge of a large, battered aluminum basin left inexplicably on the floor. It went skittering across the stone tiles, hitting the wall with a deafening clang that seemed to reverberate endlessly in the suddenly pin-drop, horrifying silence of the kitchen. Oh, God. Noise. He'd made noise. Silence descended again, thick and pregnant. Then, hurried, heavy footsteps pounded from the main room. Coming towards the curtain. Coming fast. Mai knew. She knew he'd seen. Trapped. He was trapped. The echo of the clanging basin seemed to hang in the thick, fetid air for an eternity before fading, replaced by a sudden, terrifying silence. Bao froze, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, his breath locked in his chest. He knew, with bone-chilling certainty, that he'd sealed his fate. Then came the sound, rapid, heavy footsteps approaching from the main room. Unhurried menace replaced by sudden, decisive speed. There was no escape. The beaded curtain leading back to the restaurant's deceptive warmth was ripped aside with violent force. Mai stood framed in the doorway, and the transformation was absolute, terrifying. Gone was the alluring hostess, gone was the calculating predator assessing her prey. What stood there now was pure, unadulterated fury, a primal rage burning in eyes that seemed to glow with a dark, internal fire in the dim kitchen light. Her face was a mask of wrath, lips peeled back from her teeth in a snarl. And the cleaver, she held it now not loosely or casually, but gripped tightly, its heavy, stained blade held low and ready, gleaming wetly. You, she hissed, the single word dripping with venomous intent, stripped bare of its earlier honeyed sweetness. You saw too much. Far too much. She didn't wait for a response. She moved with a speed that defied her slender frame, lunging forward, the cleaver whistling through the air and a deadly arc aimed straight at Bao's head. Pure instinct, raw animal terror, threw Bao sideways. He slipped on the viscous, blood-slick stone floor, crashing down hard on his side, the impact jarring his teeth. He looked up just in time to see the cleaver bury itself deep into the gore-stained wood of the butcher's block, precisely where his neck had been a split second before. Chips of dark wood flew. He scrambled backwards, scrabbling for purchase on the slippery floor, his hands smearing through congealed blood and unidentifiable filth. The stench, metallic blood, rotting meat, the underlying sickly sweetness, filled his nostrils, threatening to choke him. The small kitchen felt impossibly tight, a claustrophobic death trap closing in around him. The severed legs on the table seemed to mock him, the head with its silent scream promised his own imminent end. Mai wrenched the cleaver free from the block with a grunt of effort, turning towards him, her movements fluid, practiced, terrifyingly graceful. Nowhere to hide, little trucker, she snarled, stalking towards him, the cleaver held ready for another strike. Bao's eyes darted wildly around the horrific space. Escape seemed impossible. But survival instinct screamed louder than fear. He spotted it, near a pile of discarded vegetable scraps by a rusty sink, a small paring knife, its handle grimy, its blade short and thin. Pathetic. Utterly pathetic against the heavy cleaver. But it was something. Anything. He lunged for it, snatching it up, the cool plastic handle feeling flimsy and inadequate in his trembling grip. He scrambled to his feet, holding the tiny knife out defensively, his body shaking uncontrollably. Mai paused, seeing the pitiful weapon. A harsh, barking laugh escaped her lips, devoid of any humor. That? You think that little toy will save you? She shook her head, pity replaced by contempt. Foolish. Then she came at him again, a whirlwind of deadly intent. I'll barely manage to get the paring knife up in time. Clang! The impact of the heavy cleaver against the tiny blade sent a shockwave up his arm, numbing his fingers, nearly tearing the knife from his grasp. He stumbled back, tripping over the discarded aluminum basin, barely keeping his feet. Mai pressed her advantage, the cleaver a relentless, flashing arc of death. Downwards chop, sideways slash, thrust, she moved with brutal efficiency, forcing Bao deeper into the cramped kitchen, her strength astonishing, terrifying. He could only dodge, weave, parry weakly with the small knife, slipping constantly on the treacherous floor, the stench of the abattoir filling his lungs with every ragged gasp. Terror was a physical entity, squeezing the air from his chest, clouding his vision. He knew he couldn't keep this up. She was too strong, too skilled, too relentless. Seeing a momentary opening as Mai drew back for another heavy blow, Bao acted on pure, desperate instinct. He lunged forward, putting all his weight behind the thrust, aiming the small paring knife at her torso. He felt the blade sink into flesh, hitting something solid beneath her ribs. Mai gasped, a sharp intake of breath, stumbling back a single step. A flicker of desperate hope flared in Bao's chest. Had he hurt her? Had he actually hurt her? She looked down at the handle of the paring knife protruding from her side, just below her apron. An expression of mild annoyance crossed her face, like a woman bothered by a mosquito bite. Then, incredibly, she reached down, grasped the handle firmly, and pulled the knife out with a swift, contemptuous tug. She glanced at the small, bloody blade for a second before tossing it contemptuously aside, where it clattered uselessly against the stone floor. Dark blood welled from the wound, staining her shirt, but she seemed utterly unfazed. No grimace of pain. No faltering. She looked back at Bao, and her lips curved into a horrifying smile, a rictus of pure predatory amusement, her eyes burning with cold fire. Tickles, she whispered, the sound chilling Bao to the core. My turn. Bao stared, his mind reeling. The blood, the wound, she should be screaming, collapsing. But she stood there, bleeding, smiling that impossible, terrifying smile. Not human. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't human. The last vestiges of rational thought fled, replaced by blinding panic. He turned and bolted, abandoning any thought of fighting, driven only by the primal need to escape. He threw himself at the sturdy wooden door at the back of the kitchen, the way out, surely. It didn't budge. He slammed his shoulder against it. Solid. Locked. Bolted from the outside? Or maybe just stuck fast with age and grime? Trapped. He hammered on the thick wood with his fists, screaming, sobbing, incoherent pleas mixing with curses. Did you really think I'd leave a back door open? Mai's voice came from behind him, chillingly calm now, laced with cruel amusement. She was stalking towards him slowly, savoring his terror, the cleaver swinging gently by her side. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. Just you, and me, and the preparations for dinner. Despair threatened to engulf Bao. He was going to die here, in this filthy, blood-soaked kitchen, ending up as just another ingredient in her horrific meals. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for anything, any hope, any weapon. His gaze fell upon the stove. And the huge, bubbling pot sitting on the largest burner. The pot she'd dropped the head into earlier. Steam rose from it in thick clouds, carrying the foul stench of its contents. An idea, insane, desperate, born of sheer terror, flashed through his mind. He didn't think. He reacted. He lunged towards the stove, ignoring the searing heat radiating from the burner. He grabbed the pot's handles, metal, burning hot even through the grime. Adrenaline surged, momentarily overriding the pain. With a guttural roar, a sound ripped from the very depths of his terrified soul, he heaved the massive pot upwards, turning, swinging its horrifying, boiling contents in a wide arc directly towards Mai as she advanced on him. Time seemed to slow. He saw the look of surprise flash across her face, replaced instantly by rage, just before the scalding wave hit her. Boiling broth, liquefied fat, chunks of unidentifiable meat, and the ghastly, wide-eyed head, the entire putrid concoction slammed into her face and upper body. A scream tore from Mai's throat unlike anything Bao had ever heard. It wasn't human. It was high-pitched, piercing, filled with an agony that seemed to crack the very air, echoing endlessly in the small kitchen. She staggered backwards, clawing frantically at her face, the boiling liquid adhering, cooking, melting flesh. The sickening stench of burning hair and seared meat instantly filled the room, overpowering even the smell of blood and decay. Chunks of her skin blistered, blackened, sloughed away where the boiling fat clung. She reeled blindly, still screaming that unearthly, tortured sound, momentarily disabled, consumed by unimaginable pain. Bao didn't waste the precious seconds her agony bought him. He dropped the now empty, searingly hot pot, ignoring the burns blooming on his own hands. He looked wildly around, spotted the heavy cleaver Mai had dropped when the oil hit her. He snatched it up, its weight felt obscene, deadly in his hand. He turned to the locked door and attacked it with the ferocity of a cornered animal. He swung the cleaver like an axe, hacking at the thick wood around the lock, ignoring the splintering shards flying past his face. Wood groaned, splintered, cracked. He reversed the cleaver, using the heavy back to hammer at the bolt, screaming with the effort, fueled by terror and adrenaline. Metal screeched, wood fractured. With a final, desperate blow and a shoulder charge that threatened to dislocate his arm, the door burst inwards with a crack of splintering timber. Freedom! He didn't look back. Didn't dare. He threw himself through the opening, out into the cold, blessedly clean, fog-drenched night air, gulping it down in ragged, sobbing breaths. Behind him, Mai's horrific, inhuman screams continued unabated, pursuing him, echoing off the unseen mountain walls. He sprinted across the wet gravel towards the dark shape of his truck, fumbling frantically in his pocket for the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grasp them. He wrenched the driver's door open, threw himself inside, slammed it shut. Key jammed into the ignition, turned, engine roaring to life, thank God. He slammed the truck into gear, stomped on the accelerator. Tires spun on the loose gravel, spitting stones, then bit. The truck lurched forward, fishtailing wildly before straightening out, hurtling away from the nightmare noodle house, away from the horror, plunging blindly into the suffocating gray oblivion of the Serpent's Coil Pass, Mai's agonizing screams still ringing, impossibly loud, in his ears. He drove like a man possessed, fleeing not just the monster, but the sanity he'd left shattered on that blood-soaked kitchen floor. Bao drove through the swirling gray dawn, miles away from the Serpent's Coil Pass, Mai's unearthly screams still echoing in his skull, a phantom soundtrack to the horrors replaying behind his eyes. He drove until the truck ran out of fuel on a dusty roadside pullout hundreds of kilometers south, where he simply sat, shaking uncontrollably, staring sightlessly ahead as the sun climbed higher in the sky, unable to process, unable to move. He'd survived. Somehow. But the cost felt immeasurable, carved into his soul. Back on the pass, morning painted the jagged peaks with indifferent beauty. The fog began to thin, revealing the noodle house perched precariously on the cliff edge. An unnatural silence hung over it now, heavier than the lingering mist. It wasn't an anonymous tip that brought the authorities. It was a routine patrol by the Forestry Service later that morning, rangers noting the splintered, broken back door hanging ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze, and the swarm of flies buzzing insistently around the building. Curious, and then concerned by the lack of any response to their calls, they cautiously approached. The smell hit them 20 feet from the broken door. A stomach-churning miasma of decay, stale blood, and the horrific, greasy stench of burned flesh. Experienced men, accustomed to finding animal carcasses, paled and exchanged uneasy glances. One pushed the broken door fully open, peering into the dim, fly-filled kitchen. What they found inside would haunt their nightmares for years. Miley sprawled amidst the filth and gore, her body grotesquely twisted. Her face and torso were an unrecognizable horror of blackened, blistered, weeping tissue where the boiling oil had struck, melting features into a nightmarish mask. But the immediate horror of her corpse was quickly overshadowed by the surrounding evidence. The stained butcher's block. The bucket brimming with human offal. The pitiful, hacked limbs still lying on the table. The blood-splattered walls. The knives, the cleaver, discarded on the floor. And, simmering gently on the stove, the large pot whose contents confirmed the unspeakable truth of the noodle house's specialties. Even hardened police officers, arriving later, struggled to maintain their composure in the face of such calculated, sustained butchery. Word traveled fast, carried down the mountain by shaken officials, spreading like a contagion through the nearby towns and along the trucking routes. The charming little stop on the pass, the place with the beautiful owner and the memorable food? A house of horrors. A cannibal's den. Men who had frequented the place, who had laughed and joked with Mai, who had praised her cooking, were overcome with waves of nausea and self-disgust, the memory of every savory bite now tainted with unimaginable revulsion. How many times had they eaten there? What, exactly, had been in that rich, dark stew? The questions were almost worse than the answers. The official investigation was swift, if not entirely thorough. The perpetrator was dead, conveniently silenced. The scattered human remains belonged to at least 3 other individuals, identities unknown, likely transient truckers or lost travelers lured into Mai's web. The conclusion, released to a horrified public, spoke of severe psychological disturbance, a descent into homicidal mania. Mai's own death? Officially ruled a grotesque cooking accident. Perhaps, the report suggested, in her deranged state, she had stumbled while carrying the boiling pot. The evidence of a violent struggle, the smashed door, the cleaver found near Bao's escape route, these details were minimized, attributed to her final, mad frenzy. No mention was made of a potential survivor, no awkward questions asked about who might have inflicted those fatal burns. It was cleaner that way. A contained horror. A lone madwoman on a desolate pass. The Serpent's Coil noodle house was shuttered immediately, heavy chains looped through the handles of the front door, windows boarded up tight. But it didn't simply fade away. It festered. It became a scar on the landscape, a dark landmark whispered about in fearful tones. An inevitable haunted legend was born. Truckers began taking longer, less convenient routes to avoid that stretch of the pass entirely, especially after dark. Locals spoke of strange, cold spots on the road nearby, of hearing disembodied screams echoing on foggy nights, of seeing faint lights moving behind the boarded-up windows. Some claimed Mai's vengeful spirit still lingered, forever bound to her abattoir, waiting hungrily for new company. And Bao? No one ever connected the traumatized trucker found catatonic in his rig miles away with the horrors discovered on the pass. He never drove professionally again. The official story was burnout, a nervous breakdown from the pressures of the road. But those who knew him saw the change. The haunted look in his eyes that never quite left. The way he flinched at sudden noises. The tremor in his hands. He lived, yes, but a vital part of him had died in that kitchen, drowned in boiling oil and terror. He carried the screams, the smell, the sight of it all locked deep inside, a silent, festering wound. The Serpent's Coil Pass remains, winding its treacherous way through the mountains. The noodle house still stands, slowly decaying, paint peeling, roof sagging, consumed by weather and vines, a rotting monument to unspeakable acts. The fog still rolls in, thick and secretive, blanketing the slopes in gray silence. And the unanswered questions hang heavy in the air. Who were Mai's other victims? What twisted path led her to such monstrous deeds? Was she merely a madwoman, or something older, darker, drawn to the desolate pass? The pass holds onto its secrets, and perhaps, nestled deep within that decaying shack, something else waits patiently in the mist, forever hungry.